This is Isonzo. We're here on Xbox Series X taking a look at this game that sends you to the front lines of World War I action on the Italian front. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So, what are we getting here on the Series X? Well, it's basically like one mode, but with an option to adjust things a little bit further. So, with that, it is targeting a full 4K resolution at 60 FPS, but right now, as I have selected, there is the option to essentially uncap the frame rate. So if you got VRR going, it can go up to 120 FPS. So I've chosen to kind of have that going. We're gonna kind of now just adjust that quickly under the graphics. You can change your field of view as well if you'd like to. But yeah, you can uncap the frame rate. Now, keep in mind that uncapping the frame rate, at least from what I have seen, essentially really creates a lot of like screen tearing, even with VRR. So just keep that in mind, but it is obviously at points you can get a lot higher of a frame rate. I'll also mention that YouTube doesn't support 120 FPS, I can't record at 120, so that's kind of, again, the state of things when it comes to capturing this sort of experience. But yeah, when you've turned off the uncapped frame rates, obviously the picture quality does improve a little bit, and, it does seem to actually run, for the most part, I would say pretty smooth. You don't get the screen tearing and whatnot, but it is kind of cool to have that higher option. Now, I've also been told, because I did ask, that they will be doing a later update down the road that will introduce additional graphics modes. There'll be like a dynamic resolution mode, a mode that favors image quality, and a mode that favors performance. So those are future things where if you're like looking at this video down the road, those might exist at that point, but as of now, they currently do not. And I thought that was really nice of them to actually provide that context to me, so I could pass it along to you guys so that you have, that idea that, hey, they are going to be adding updates and they are going to be changing things further, and I think that is fantastic. And they're going to achieve that, I guess, with dynamic resolution scaling as well, it notes. So this is a game where it is multiplayer focused entirely. You play with real players, there's crossplay. I don't know if you saw that in the setting, but if you want to, for whatever reason, turn off the crossplay, that is an option under general. Once again, FOV if you're into FOV adjustments. You could change the gore level if you'd like to really amp it up. The game can actually be pretty gory, like, people are screaming, there's limbs, there's blood, it gets pretty intense, and yeah. It is a neat attack or defend kind of scenario for large-scale conflicts up to 40 players. It does get kind of crazy. There's bots if there's never, like, if regular people aren't around. If you played their previous titles, Verdun, Tannenberg, I think you'll really enjoy this. If you are not familiar with those titles, I have videos of them up on the channel. I think that maybe you might play this one and want to go back and play those ones. Those ones are all optimized for the Series X as well, which is nice. They went back to their legacy titles and, upgraded them, which is fantastic. And then this one, I say, is actually pretty cool. I mean, it's very much a mix of trench warfare and then like conventional gameplay. I wouldn't say it's like incredibly intensely like tactical, if you get what I mean. Like, it kind of bridges the gap of like, a little bit more arcade type combat while also being something where it's like, one shot you kind of die. So I think it kind of mixes and melds together really, really intensive strategic combat of things, but also, movement-wise and whatnot, it does feel a little bit more arcadey-like, and you do move around, and it doesn't feel like it takes forever. That being said, matches can be pretty long. I've had, like, defensive matches take up to, like, an hour, and yeah, I've actually been playing quite a bit of this, because I am enjoying it. And then I've had, like, offensive matches where I'm on the offensive, and it takes, like, I don't know, half an hour or something like that. We just storm the positions. And then the other cool thing about this one is the setup of it. So there's several maps or so, and they're pretty large, but they're like progressional sets of maps. So they're kind of in sets of, oh, that's gonna blow up. They're kind of in sets of 3. So you kind of do, like, you play one match, and then it kind of leads into another map. Like, it's the same, I guess, theater of war kind of thing. Like, if you've played, like, Operations and, like, Battlefield, I guess I would compare it to kind of that, where it's like you are, you know, kind of moving along through these different battling fronts, and then it's like a long-term kind of battle. It's quite neat. And a lot of this is very hill-based, being the Italian campaign. That being said, there are some building-type maps, and it may not seem like it, but there is quite a lot of variation between the differing levels that are present. You can also set up a custom match if you want to go that way. You don't want to just join a server. Like, the game features server browsers, like, just by default, and you can pick whatever lobby you want to join. I think that's awesome. I love server browsers, especially in shooter games where you're trying to be like, oh, I want the perfect setup and whatnot. And yeah, that's kind of how it goes for the maps. I think the maps are actually really, really cool. There's like a forest one that's a little bit more like a city, a couple different hilled ones where you're like tacking up a hill, attacking down a hill, very rocky, lots of different kind of tunneled trench warfare going on. You know, and then there's like a progressional system with different weapons and different tools, and then there's like you play kind of different roles too on the maps themselves. You got to destroy positions, build positions, and that allows you to progress and move forward onto the next objective, or get a different spawn point, or prevent the other team from getting a spawn point. And that in itself is kind of neat. And then there's like a bit of a building type mechanic too, so you could, like, if your team needs ammo, you know, I could sit here and I can build like an ammo crate or something like that, or there's different little like build stations and whatnot, and you know, obviously different roles kind of interact with that. And then there's a system of health too, where it's like, oh, I get like basically almost, I'm just kind of getting insta kill pace right now, but you know, you can get like mortally wounded, if that makes sense, or you're bleeding out and you gotta bandage yourself, or you could have like, you know, one of your teammates will come and they'll bandage you, and you know, stuff like that is kind of interesting. I do like, you know, the different mechanical elements of stuff. I find to be quite interesting in this one. Like, it does seem to have a lot of sort of in-depth mechanics. The bots, you know, the regular like AI, if you don't have full players, I would imagine when the game, because you know I'm playing this pre-launch, and I have played against some real players too, but I would imagine regular matches, you know, it'll be pretty decently full off the beginning, but, you know, regardless long term, you'll still be able to compete against the bots. They're not the brightest, but they will definitely kill you. And if you are creating custom matches, you could set difficulty so you can make them, you know, even more intense. Totally up to you, and I think that's interesting. Okay, cool, yeah, they just build a spawn point here. Other team's going to try to destroy our spawn point. Goes back and forth. Gunplay and stuff feels pretty good. I feel like I'm able to like shoot enemies at a distance, but it's also like not super easy insta kills and stuff. You gotta actually like, you know, line up your shots, get the hits going. It's a little like again, it kind of bridges that gap between like, you know, simulation or a hardcore intense shooter and something that is like maybe a little bit more easygoing. So I think it kind of mixes well, if that makes sense. I'm trying to get that across. Visually, I actually quite like how the game looks, you know, from the aesthetic standpoint. I wouldn't say it's like the most mind-blowing visual next-gen showcase, but it's still like, you know, the uniforms and stuff look really good. They're very authentic. I like the look of the mountains. Oh, that's a lot of enemies. Huh. I like the look of the backdrops. It feels expansive. It feels like you're in an actual place fighting. You know, there's lots of tree cover. There's lots of regular cover. It really feels like you're in a carved out place. I think the guns look fine. I like the UI. It's simple enough, easy going. You know, and you just get these large scale locations of warfare. And I think it all generally quite works out in a very appealing way. At least to me, I think it looks, you know, good, runs decently well. Obviously, you've been seeing maybe like little bits of screen tearing here or there. Turning off the uncapped frame rate actually will probably give you the better kind of thing. But I mean, if you have 120, you kind of maybe want to get closer to it, if that makes sense. I don't know how big of a deal that will be for some people. Like I said, though, other modes are coming down the road. When it comes to your objectives, I do feel that it is decently varied. Like, sometimes you are blowing something up, sometimes you are capturing a post, and then you're just kind of moving along, and it's sort of this long kind of progressional either attack or defend situation. And I think that actually works out quite well. And as I said, you know, Verdun and Tannenberg, if you find this one interesting, you could go back and play those, and they're essentially different like fronts and or theaters of war you can dive into. And I think they do a pretty good job on authenticity of, like, you know, the in-game world, the designs, the combat. They give you a range of different weapons. You know, it is a little bit, I want to say a little bit more of an indie type effort as well, so keep that in mind. But, you know, it's always nice to have more World War shooter options, especially like World War I is something that we don't typically see a lot of. So the more games in that era, the better. More options. I think it's really, really neat that's available. Cross-gen multiplayer, which I think is kind of a no-duh. Take control of the Isonzo River Valley. There's the Alps. It literally and figuratively elevates World War I action. That's kind of funny. So mountain warfare is definitely like a big focus here. There's different support stuff. Depending on the scenario, you might have teammates on like chain guns firing away. You might have teammates, or again, even enemies, I guess, depending on your side, using like mortar strikes. You know, these huge explosions, and the map will get all torn up. And depending on your damage to enemies, you'll hear like screaming and pain, and it's pretty visceral. It's pretty violent, pretty intensive, and you can adjust that too. There's over 30 World War I weapons, poisonous gas attacks, artillery barrages, and stuff. You know, it is trying to be authentic. It is trying to showcase a theater of war that I think is not as represented, if that makes sense. Like, it seems like they are definitely knocking off the various fronts of war for the era and that, and I do appreciate that. I'm actually curious. You know, I would imagine they'll probably continue doing different things down the road, but I am wondering if they'll continue doing different fronts and whatnot, and because that would be really interesting. Oh geez. But yeah, I do actually quite like this one. I find it to be pretty entertaining, pretty fun. I think you can certainly enjoy it if you are into, you know, this kind of era. It's also fun, you know, you gotta actually waste the clip before reloading. That's kind of interesting. And then there's just like all these dynamics of like, you know, kind of leveling, improving things, getting access to new stuff, fighting off waves of enemies and troops. Oh, damn, that was intensive. And then trying to get things done while you have, you know, X amount of character tickets, we usually call them because of Battlefield, but you know, you only have so many lives as an offensive front before you lose and stuff, and yeah, that's a whole big part of the combat is actually trying to get that push going. But it feels like, you know, like a decently, really dynamic, carved out world. Like, it really does feel like they took the time to kind of be like, okay, you know, where can I give players lots of cover to move through the environment? Wow, I was missing shots like crazy. You know, how are these trenches set up? Is this going to give people opportunities to do different flank routes? Like, it may seem like a narrow setup of combat, but it actually, as you've hopefully been seeing as we're running through here, you know, it does offer many flanking routes, but it does keep things focused enough so that the people aren't just like, you know, sprawling in from all different sides. You're actually able to set up good defensive points. Sometimes on the offense, you actually have to like push forward and create that offensive, and it feels like kind of really earned when you get through and whatnot. It just like, it seems like there's a lot of, you know, kind of potential with this one, combat wise, gameplay wise. I think it's a pretty neat title. I mean, I've certainly been having a blast with it, actually, like, you know, going around here, firing away, taking fronts, playing the different levels and seeing what they have to offer. Because there is a good selection of maps. It may not, you know, I say several maps, you may be like, oh, that's not a whole lot, but, you know, these levels are really big. Like, this is just, you know, you can see at the top there, all those little dots, like, those are more segments that after, if we ever take this area, we have to go and fight to. You just, like, kind of look all the way down there to the top, and those like, all progressional places we'll have to get to in order to win on the offensive, and it's just, like, you know, it's quite interesting. Like I said, I think they kind of mostly hit the mark for me. you know, I do think this looks decently nice. I think they have a little bit more little polishing here or there for the performance stuff, but you know, once again, going back to that option that they are adding additional graphics modes kind of makes me go, oh, okay, so they know that and they're going to clean it up more. But yeah, the screen tearing stuff, I'm kind of assuming that shows up on the recording stuff is kind of like, can be a little bit annoying, but like I said, little bit more clean when you've turned off the uncapped frame rate. But then again, you know, next gen, kind of want to have the uncapped frame rate, right? You know, it's this nicer level of fluidity and realism, and yeah, it's nice. So they put together a pretty nice World War I shooter. The Italian front is, to me, fresh. You know, it feels different. It's lightly touched upon. There's lots of leveling options for you to enjoy. There's a lot of combative scenarios. I think you can have a blast sitting here, wasting away hours trying to take positions and do combat. It's definitely, to me, has its own gameplay vibe that I think sets it aside from other shooters this whole little series of games do. You know, like alongside Verdun and Tannenberg here, which again are pretty cool games. And, you know, similar to this one, just a little bit more aged if you're not familiar with them, but, you know, in the same like line and lineage of game designs. And it's kind of a cool little thing that I think you could, you know, kind of have a blast playing with, and I hope that it kind of finds a community and does well on the console here and kind of grows, because I think they've actually done a pretty good job on this one for the most part. It's fun, it's engaging, it's got like neat combat, it's something that I keep rolling through and I'm like, oh, I'm having a good time with. So I kind of hope you will find that it's enjoyable as well. So I don't have any other details to kind of provide at this point, but, you know, just enjoy some more, I guess, non-commentary type gameplay from here on out. But, yeah, kind of a cool, well thought out, and exciting World War I experience. Whoa!
Sono nostri adesso! Stanno per travolgerci! Dategli addosso! Ora! Ce l'abbiamo, ragazzi! Cava, fratello! Ormai è nostro! Abbiamo perso la posizione, ragazzi! Ce l'hanno portata via! Abbiamo messo in sicurezza la posizione! Stanno guadagnando terreno! Ce l'abbiamo, ragazzi!